I'm Eric Dyer, architect, member of AIA Monterey Bay's Board of Directors and AIA-MB's Programming Director for 2022. I want to thank everyone for joining our webinar today, focusing on how local jurisdictions are implementing the California state laws regarding accessory dwelling units, or ADUs as they're called. And we really have an amazing, perfect panel for this today. We have Craig Spencer, County of Monterey Housing and Community Development Services Manager, and Phil Angelo, who's a planner with Monterey County. Daisy Allen, who's a planner with Santa Cruz County, who focuses on ADUs. Marnie Waffle, Senior Planner with the City of Carmel. Kim Cole, Community Development Director with the City of Monterey. And Alessia Chukanova, CEO and founder of HomeWhip, a construction concierge company, homeowner advocate, and ADU specialist from the Bay Area. The recent ADU laws obviously came from the very significant housing shortage and the corresponding huge problem with affordability of housing in California. The state saw many areas of the state which had over the years resisted building more housing through such mechanisms as zoning and development standards, and particularly here, water restrictions and water source development. And for a myriad of reasons, not least of which are probably some not in my backyard sort of thinking, but also certainly preserving sensitive environmental areas and open space and community character. But the legislatures decided placing state mandates upon local jurisdictions to really force the creation of housing was the only way to break the cycle, evidently. We want to have plenty of time today for people to ask questions, and this is particularly great opportunity to get your questions answered on specific project issues that you have the planners who often will be approving these projects. But I'd like to start by letting each of the panelists briefly discuss how their jurisdiction has begun to address these mandates, how that process is going, and how much activity you've seen in terms of people applying for ADU permits. Also, it'd be really interesting to hear about issues and problems that have come up with this process, how the community is responding. And I'd also like to get a sense of how important ADUs are to your community's planning for meeting overall housing goals, and how effective you're predicting ADUs to be for increasing the housing stock. So with that, I'll start with Monterey County and Craig and Phil. You guys want to make a quick introduction?
Thank you, Eric. Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, good. Yeah, so I think I'm not sure where to start, but the ADUs are important to Monterey County. It is important to across the state, so it's become a focus of the state legislature, and we're constantly trying to keep up with changes being made at the state level. We did adopt rules and regulations for accessory dwelling units back in 2011, when there was less activity going on at the state level. The state then adopted a whole bunch of more recent changes and more specifics about what we can and cannot regulate at the local level. And we began to address those as part of updates to our zoning code. Our inland and coastal, we have both in Monterey County. And so the inland regulations for ADUs was adopted by our Board of Supervisors, and it's in effect now. And it provides mostly for the ministerial approval of certain types of accessory dwelling units, junior accessory dwelling units, it follows the state law in most respects for our inland zoning code. In the coastal zone, the board adopted a resolution or an ordinance very similar to the inland. We've transmitted that to the Coastal Commission for certification, and it can't take effect until it's certified. And we've been in a protracted situation where we're having discussions with the Coastal Commission over some changes they'd like to see. and frankly, part of the communication breakdown here is housing and community development at the state level is really pushing hard to make ADUs accessible to everyone as a means for affordable housing. And they have their take as a state regulatory agency on what the state legislation means. And the Coastal Commission has a slightly different take on what it means. There's actually a provision of the state law that says that nothing in the state law is intended to supersede or alter the Coastal Act. So the Coastal Commission points to that, although they have certified accessory dwelling unit regulations throughout the state. We have some unique conditions and issues that we're grappling with. And so they've asked us to go back to our Board of Supervisors with some revisions. Some of the main things there are our northern Monterey County areas. In the coastal zone, the Coastal Commission staff, not the commission itself, doesn't believe that it's supportable to allow accessory dwelling units because of resource constraints, primarily groundwater overdraft situations in North County. That is not what our ordinance does. It does preclude new 1,200 square foot ADUs in North County. The draft one that was approved by the board I'm talking about now. It precludes new ADUs, the 1,200 up to 1,200 square feet in North County, but it would allow ADUs up to 800 square feet, including the conversion of existing structures to ADUs in North County, which we thought was consistent with the state law, but we're still having those arguments. The other points there are the provision of parking in areas where there's public access. That would be areas along like Scenic Road in Carmel, where there's on-street parking to access the beach and the beaches over there in Carmel. They don't want the provisions that don't require parking as part of an ADU to apply in those areas because it would indirectly impact the ability for public access, at least from a public street parking perspective. So we're having those discussions. We don't have those approved in the coastal zone yet. Some of the big issues really for Monterey County revolve around water and wastewater. We have different situations. It's a large county. So we have most of the main CalAmp service area, which services Carmel and incorporated areas, and a portion of the areas outside of the city of Monterey, really from Seaside down to Carmel Highlands, that is served by California American Water, who's under a cease and desist order, and has been for a couple decades now, from the State Water Board, to reduce pumping of the Carmel River, and so they don't provide new water meters. And if you're going to be installing new water fixtures, our water management district requires that you get a water permit, and that requires that you either offset through retrofitting existing fixtures to free up water credits in the amount equal to or more than the amount you're needing to use to install new fixtures with a certain amount of credits, or that you purchase water that is recognized by Water Management District, which included Malpaso water credits, and Pebble Beach Company actually has water credits that can be purchased. So that makes ADUs more expensive when you're having to purchase water in those areas. The other thing that has been a problematic outside of CalAmp service area is we have a lot of our properties are served by wells and septic systems. So our Environmental Health Bureau regulates small water systems, and the state regulates large water systems. if you have a single well on a property serving one connection, your single family dwelling, that is typically something that's not regulated as a one connection well source. But once you add an accessory dwelling unit, it becomes a two connection system. So then there needs to be approval of that water system through environmental health, and you have to have the pump capacity and water quality to satisfy that water system requirement. Somewhat related to that is septic systems, and we have a local agency management plan that provides for septic system standards. So a lot of the county still on septic, although there are places that have sewer connections. The septic systems need to be sized based on the number of bedrooms, and there has to be a certain amount of area to accommodate the nitrate loading. And that's typically about 2 acres for 2 units. It's a little bit more detailed than that, and our Environmental Health Bureau actually has some really great information about all this on their website. But that can be very costly as well if you need to update the size of your septic system or your leach fields in order to accommodate additional space for an accessory dwelling unit. And if you have less than 2 acres, you potentially need to have an engineering solution for how to accommodate the nitrate loading that we would have. So, you know, it's not a no from our Environmental Health Bureau automatically, but if you have to do the updated septic treatment systems, the engineered systems, they become very expensive and difficult. So we're trying to accommodate them where we can, but we're running up against some water and wastewater issues in particular in certain areas. If you have large lots and you already have a water system and you can get permission to connect to that water system, and your septic's already appropriately sized, we're trying not to get in the way with our zoning regulations on those. And we're allowing junior ADUs, and we're allowing conversions of existing structures, and we're removing some of the constraints that would be, you know, the growth management type constraints that we have in our general plan places like Carmel Valley. But we still are having some problems with water and wastewater being available for those accessory dwelling units. We do hope to have the coastal ordinance adopted that would provide more detailed guidance, and we are working with a consultant to prepare plans that are plan checked through our building department for folks who would want to use one of the menu of plans that we're going to develop that would help save some costs in architectural and engineering services as part of, you know, the pre-planning for making for getting permits for an ADU, and that's coming soon as well.
Okay, great. Greg, there's one question from the attendees regarding the septic systems. I'll just read it from Dan Curran. Does the county require a separate nitrate treatment system installed on all detached ADUs with septic? They are quite expensive and don't really make sense given that they can be considered as additional bedroom count to the main residence. You may have answered that, but I guess just to clarify, it sounds like you are requiring a septic design for the additional.
Yeah, if a property is on a septic system,
correct,
then there needs to be information provided about the size and capacity of that existing system. If you're increasing the number of bedrooms, you may be increasing the nitrate loading. And then it becomes a question of how big your property is. So if your property isn't large enough to accommodate the nitrate loading that's based on our local agency management plan, the LAMP it's called, then you would have to have an engineered solution, which is very expensive, like I said.
Yeah. Okay. Thanks, Greg. And I'll just make clear, we'll come back and be able to ask questions of all the panelists, but I wanted to kind of get through everyone to give us a brief introduction on how their jurisdictions are handling things. So I'm going to go on to Daisy, who's the representative from Santa Cruz County, which is north of our North County, I suppose. I don't know. So Daisy, do you want to talk about how Santa Cruz is dealing with ADU laws and their implementation?
Sure, yeah, thank you, Eric. And yeah, thank you for having me. Happy to be included here today. So, similar to Monterey County, Santa Cruz County considers ADUs to be a really important part of our infill development strategy. We have a ton of single family zoned land in Santa Cruz County. We don't have a whole lot of multifamily zone land at this time. So it's really important to have tools available to accommodate infill development on single family properties. So one of those tools in our tool belt is our ADUs. And we have had an ordinance for ADU development. It was originally called second unit development since 1983. It's been updated, many times over the years. And then with the state laws that Craig was mentioning, we have had to kind of reorganize our ordinance and update it in order to make sure that we're in alignment with state law. So we did update our ordinance in 2018 and then again in 2020 as the state laws were updated multiple times. And then we updated it again, actually, this past year after the State Housing and Community Development ADU handbook came out, establishing kind of clarifications about the new ADU laws. So we just had our Board of Supervisors approve that ordinance in October, and then it was certified by the Coastal Commission a couple of weeks ago at their March meeting. So as of now, our ADU ordinance is in compliance with state law, and we do have an ordinance in compliance with state law in effect in our coastal zone. The only differences that we have in our coastal zone in terms of the ADU requirements are related to discretionary review and also parking. So in terms of parking, we have certain designated areas in our coastal zone where we have a lot of tourist activity, popular beach areas. So in these designated areas, we require parking for ADUs, and we require replacement parking when you do a garage conversion. Whereas outside of those areas, you don't need to do replacement parking when you do a garage conversion per state law, and you also can qualify for exceptions to parking requirements, such as proximity to transit. And then the other difference in the coastal zone is discretionary review. So in the coastal zone, if you are in ag land or timberland or parks parcel, we require discretionary review for an ADU, and then also you may require a coastal development permit as well.
Just to clarify,
and then,
I was just thinking about how that discretionary review, is that based on the fact that it's in the coastal zone and that exception that the state law addresses in terms of the having to follow the Coastal Act? Is that how that is allowed?
Right. Yeah. So so in the state ADU law, there is a provision that as Craig was mentioning, that the state ADU law does not override the Coastal Act. These are, the Coastal Commission is a separate jurisdiction, and they have their own, power that's kind of separate from these like state level zoning laws. So it's possible to have different regulations inside and outside the coastal zone as needed in order to ensure that your local ordinance is in compliance with the Coastal Act. So, I mean, the main, issue with the Coastal Act here is that the highest priority, land use in the coastal zone is, ag land, and then after that is visitor accommodation and like, visitors serving commercial and ensuring access to the coast. So housing is not there as a top priority in the coastal zone per the Coastal Act. So that's where you get these conflicts that have to sort of be resolved at the local level.
Mm-hmm. And how do you describe discretionary review?
Yeah, so per state law, most ADUs now require only ministerial review, which means just a building permit. And you have to, get that building permit review done within 60 days of receiving the application. However, it's possible to have different rules, like I mentioned, in the coastal zone. So in the coastal zone, some projects do require coastal development permits, and some projects also require other types of discretionary permits, such as use or development permits through our planning department before you can get a building permit. So these are other types of permits that you need to obtain through the planning department first. Involves review by our zoning staff. In some cases, zoning administrator approval first before you can get your building permit. We do have a streamlined process for coastal development permits in Santa Cruz County where you can do a combined application for your building permit and your CDP in order to kind of move the process along.
But the criteria in which those development permits are granted for ADUs, are they limited in terms of, or are they, I guess, are they just like any other development then? So I was kind of just curious about how you're viewing ADU development. You would think the state law would be able to, limit the amount of things you could evaluate it on, basically.
No, so the state law does not limit what we can require in the coastal zone. Okay. So that's what we're talking about, right? Is the rules exactly. That are different in the coastal zone. Exactly. Yeah, so for coastal development permits, there are certain discretionary findings that need to be made in order to approve a coastal development permit. And those are not different for ADUs as opposed to other types of developments. Okay, great, thank you. I'll just let you answer this. This is a question from June Solano of our chapter, and I believe I know the answer to this, but I'll let you answer it. He talks about the city of Carmel does not include ADUs in its allowable FAR and lot coverage calculations. Is this the same thing for Santa Cruz and the other jurisdictions? Yeah, so ADUs are not included in density calculations, and then ADUs are exempt from, per state law, ADUs are exempt from FAR calculations up to 800 square feet. Above 800 square feet, Santa Cruz County does include ADUs in our FAR calculations. And I don't know if the other jurisdictions want to answer that question as well. Good. Thank you, Daisy. I think that was really informative. I'll go on to, we have Marnie and Kim would be next, and I'm actually talk about how Monterey and Carmel are implementing the state law, but I think I'd love to get a sense about how the smaller towns such as Monterey and Carmel are addressing these ADUs when there's areas, a lot of areas in these towns where there's very small lot sizes, and how they're dealing with the regulations. I mean, for example, Carmel, a lot of it is just 40 by 100-foot lots. So Marnie, why don't you take that first, and we'll move on to Kim after that in Monterey.
Sure. So that's definitely a challenge for us here in Carmel, that our standard lot size is 4,000 square feet, and you've got 40 feet of frontage. In some cases, the statewide exemption ADU of 800 square feet, is the size of a typical Carmel cottage. And with small lot sizes, maintaining setbacks, you really have to get creative on how to integrate ADUs in the village. Parking is also, we anticipate it's going to be a challenge as well, with limited on-street parking and conversion of garages to ADUs, eliminating the only parking on site.
Arnie,
That has,
I just want to see somebody is not muted. So please, if you're not speaking, mute your
General
mic.
planning app, right? And then-
I actually think that's some background noise here in my office.
Oh, it is?
Um,
Okay, I'll leave it.
I apologize.
I'll let you talk over it then.
No.
So yeah, so parking is another challenge. So we have not adopted our local ordinance yet. So we are still just working under the state guidelines and implementing them the best we can. As was previously mentioned, water is another issue for us. So, unless property owners purchase Malpaso water, we're seeing some interest in ADU development that cannot proceed because there aren't enough water credits available on the property for them. Let's see, since 2017, I think we've approved almost 40 accessory dwelling units. So we are feeling like there is, there's some interest, and we continue to get applications on a regular basis. At this time, I think about 14 or 15 have either been constructed or under construction. So we're looking forward to developing our local ordinance and trying to address some of these challenges that we're facing. Another one for us that we're going to be looking at really closely are impacts to historic resources. So we have about 300 listed historic resources in Carmel, and how we integrate ADUs without impacting those is going to be really important.
And I think those are, correct me if I'm wrong, but historic resources are one of the things that's spelled out in the state law that allows some exemptions. Is that your understanding?
Yes. And so what our local ordinance will really help us do is create those objective standards by which we can evaluate ADUs and still, support the construction and development of them while maintaining our character.
And then how does Carmel view, I think it was interesting what Daisy was saying about the exemptions for the coastal zone. And correct me if I'm wrong about how much of the coastal zone is considered in Carmel. Is it the entire town? Obviously, the Carmel has a certified local program that was certified by the Coastal Commission, but is all Carmel part of the coastal zone?
It is. The entirety of the city is in the coastal zone. And because we do have our own certified LCP, we can issue our own coastal development permits. And again, that's something that our local ordinance will really need to take a look at because it is a citywide coastal zone. How are we going to address some of these parking issues? And do we focus more on the area of the city that's adjacent to Carmel Beach? We do have bus stops throughout the community. So the exemption on parking for being within transit, most properties are within a half mile of a bus stop. So we have pretty much accepted that waiver of parking will be part of the local ordinance, but certainly might look at the specific impacts down by Scenic and along San Antonio as we're developing our local ordinance.
Okay, Great, thank you, Marnie. Kim, do you want to talk about Monterey?
Good afternoon, everyone. It's nice to be here and to have this opportunity to speak to you and hopefully be able to answer some questions. I'm just going to focus on a couple differences in Monterey. The city adopted its revised ADU ordinance in the deliberations were in November, and it became effective law in December of 2021. Just a couple differences for us. Our ordinance actually goes beyond the basics in state law. Our community wanted to support ADU development. And I think one of the key differences to look at is our multifamily areas. We're fairly dense in our multifamily areas. We have our typical lot size is 5,000 square feet, so 50 feet wide by 100 feet deep. We typically see somewhere around 4 apartment units if it's built out to capacity. What we took the opportunity to look at is to preserve the parking on site for these multifamily structures is to allow an ADU to be constructed above an existing garage. So the basic state requirement is a maximum height of 16 feet for an ADU. In our R3 districts, we allow it up to 25 feet as long as it's above a garage. And it does have to go through design review for that increased height. So the city wanted to preserve the parking, but provide additional opportunities for ADUs, but not necessarily destroy the person behind their view. So that's something that I think is different about Monterey and what we did to address very small lot sizes in our multifamily areas. The other, we did work through, we have a lot of historic resources as well. As Marnie mentioned, you can create objective design standards for historic properties, and we have 4. If it's an attached ADU, it needs to be located at the rear of the structure. If it's a detached ADU with a historic property, we try to achieve 10 feet separation between the ADU and the historic resource. We also have a requirement that the ADU not match the exterior finish of the historic resource. We're trying not to create fake history. So consistent with the Secretary of Interior standards, we want differentiation between construction types. And the last standard is that locating new exterior doors for ADUs so they don't face the front yard. So we're trying to get them to really be located behind the main residence or the main historic structure. So I think those are sort of the 2 key differences in Monterey that are, that are either objective design standards consistent with state law or where we went further with multifamily development. The big constraint for our community is water supply. And I think Craig and Marnie both did a great job explaining that. It's even more restrictive in Monterey in that we cannot purchase water for new construction in our community. We were not part of the environmental documents for the Mount Paso water project. So literally every project has to remove water fixtures from the existing house usually it's a house or multifamily units on the property, retrofit those, and we're trying to squeak out 1 bathroom and an efficiency kitchen. And so that continues to be the most significant constraint to new development in our community. And I do want to, just because this is an opportunity and you may want to look it up on your own, our city council at their last city council meeting passed an agenda item asking multiple agencies to send letters to the State Water Resources Control Board asking that the cease and desist order be lifted. The reasoning behind that is the official diversions or the illegal diversions from the Carmel River were required to be ceased on December of 2021. So there are no more illegal diversions. At the city of Monterey, we would like the opportunity to set new water meters and work within on-site water credits. So our council sent letters to the Monterey Peninsula Water Management District, Monterey One Water, AMBAG, and copied the letters also to requested the State Water Resources Control Board lift the cease and desist order. So we have that ability. that's going to be key for us to be able to move forward in our housing supply issue in our community. So I just want to put that out there. If you're interested in reading those letters, maybe petitioning your own local jurisdictions to see if they're willing to adopt resolutions requesting the cease and desist order be lifted, that would be in line with what the city of Monterey is requesting.
Okay,
So
great.
thank you very much, and nice to have this opportunity.
Yeah, thank you, Kim. I just want to let everyone know we will have plenty of question and answer sessions in a little bit where we'll actually call upon people that can unmute and talk. But I do want to try to answer some of the questions or get some of the questions answered that are placed in the chat. And again, we'll go back to some of them, make sure they're all answered. But one from Libby Barnes to Kim was, can water management change the laws to at least allow the second bathroom protocol to be transferred to the ADU?
Well, I think the water district's in charge of their own rules, so I think they have that ability to modify those as appropriate. And that might be an interesting concept to follow up as well. Right now, the current direction is they're not allowing that.
Okay, thank you. I'd like to bring in Alessia now. I'd love to hear your thoughts, Alessia, on what you've heard so far and really see how you see ADU laws being implemented in the Bay Area communities you're working regularly with as well. So I'll give you the floor at this point.
Thank you, Eric, and thank you for the invitation to be here. I'm here more as an ADU specialist today than a representative of my company. I've personally pulled permits from various jurisdictions in the Bay Area, from Livermore and Berkeley to Burlingame, San Jose, and some other cities in between. I am very happy to hear that you guys have already started what I think is the most important process in making ADUs possible in local neighborhoods, and that's communication between all the participants of the process, utility companies, governments, and the Coastal Commission that we have spent a lot of time talking today. And I'm also the member of the Casita Coalition. That's a nonprofit very active in promoting ADUs. And after all this experience, what we have come up with, we are actually giving the tools to jurisdictions to use to make ADUs more accessible and scalable. And we are calling it an ADU paging program. So I'll invite all of you to check it out. Because I think it takes all the best practices. Some of them were mentioned today already, like pre-approved plans, and making it more available to more people faster. Something else I would like to mention, which was not mentioned yet, I think we have different ways to build these days. And something else I've seen across various locations is misunderstanding on how modular building is different from custom on-site traditional building. And I think that's another thing that is very important for the local planners and building inspectors to understand and make sure that they know very well what is state approved and what is locally approved. Because that's very concerning when there is a building inspector who has to call his supervisor when he doesn't know what he's supposed to do on site. So that's something else that I've seen happen, and I would like to avoid it in the future.
And most prefabricated buildings are approved by the state architect, is my understanding. And
They do have to be stamped by the state, along with Title 24 covering all California zones. Something else I would like to mention, because I have seen different jurisdictions start working on master plans and pre-approved designs, etc. What I see in the field when I talk to homeowners, when you're about to pay $150,000 or $200,000 for the structure at the back of your house, you want it to be something that you really like. So even though there is a pre-approved plan, they always try to squeeze in some sort of modification. So my personal opinion is that a sample plan on the website of the jurisdiction is a much better and faster tool that can be available to homeowners than going through the whole process of the master plans. I think it's not that it shouldn't be done, but I think it's something that could be complementary and benefit more homeowners a lot. And I think we have already kind of mentioned it, that the housing element is making ADUs more important. And I think it's your secret weapon to having not only the housing element achieved, but also have a secret buffer that if you cannot develop new buildings, new residential units in different zoning locations, then ADU could, with the right approach, ADU could really fill that void. So I'll leave it at that, Derek. Available for questions if any. Thank you.
I may tag on a little bit of a question for you, Alessia. Is we had talked about the state organization, which is the State and Housing Community Development Accountability and Enforcement Unit, which is part of the HCD. And they're the ones that produced, and I'm going to put this into the chat for everyone to access, which was mentioned before, I think by Daisy, the ADU handbook produced by the state, which I think is really informative. I'm just going to see if I can add that to the chat there. And I guess my question to you, Alessia, is how have you seen that state organization review local jurisdiction ADU laws and regulations and implementation? My understanding is that that is a group individuals can go to if they have a disagreement or a question or some confusion about how a local jurisdiction is handling their application.
Well, they can, but hopefully they won't, because then the professionals will never hear back from the HCD. So it's typically and that's part of the thing that actual Casita Coalition does. We try to get together all the different questions, pull them together, and then send them to HCD to get the answers. So that not like individual architects, yes, they can do it, but at least if we get the more organized approach, I think we get the responses faster. But also these guys are active. They are slapping hands. They don't like when the communities try to kind of wiggle their way out of the ADU legislation. And I think we've all seen what happened to Woodside, which is kind of a disaster, when they try to claim that they cannot build more housing because they have some precious species, and they got the answer very quickly, and it was very embarrassing. So it does happen, and it's possible to approach them and ask them for clarification. Awful. Oh, okay. Let's leave it at that, for clarification.
Okay. Thank you very much, Alessia. I'm going to open up for more general discussion. I wanted to go back to, let's see, I'm going through the chats and go back to Craig and Phil with Monterey County. There's some questions in the chat about that, which one or a couple from Libby Barnes. If an ADU hit the water and waste roadblocks Craig mentioned and what we are experiencing, are jurisdictions planning for multifamily housing to address our housing crisis? Excuse me.
Yeah, so I mean, Monterey County has always, we haven't had much trouble meeting our market rate housing needs. Where we've had trouble is meeting our low, very low and moderate income housing requirements, and ADUs don't count towards that unless they're restricted to those income levels. We are in the process, I think MBAG's just finalizing RENA numbers for all of our jurisdictions, and we're all reeling a little bit at the numbers that are coming. since they're higher than the numbers most of us didn't meet in the last round. And so we do have some planning that needs to occur. I mean, our general plan in Monterey County does have areas for priority growth and development, some incentives for affordable housing. And we do need some implementation to plan for that, but we have approved some multifamily housing projects recently. And we're looking towards some commercial, industrial opportunities for that, as well as employee housing. We've had larger interest in employee housing recently, which is also multifamily housing, but employer sponsored. So we do have allowances for that, and we will be revisiting some of that to maybe provide more opportunity for multifamily housing as part of our housing element update in this sixth cycle, I think it is.
Okay. I had a question, because I've kind of come across this in some of my work, is Pebble Beach, how are they looking at ADUs? I haven't really got much response from the people there, and I've heard that they are trying to resist or thinking they're exempt. Is that your understanding, or how?
Yeah, so the Pebble Beach company, as a homeowners association of sorts, is looking at specific deeds for properties within Del Monte Forest. And some of those deeds restricted the ability to have ADUs. The county has kind of taken a hands-off position on that. And so really, you know, you'd have to work it out with that architectural review board for Pebble Beach company as part of your homeowners association group that the county doesn't really get involved in. The county did include the Davis-Sterling Act provision that's part of the state law. Although I'm not clear as to whether or not Pebble Beach company actually qualifies under the Davis-Sterling Act requirements. I don't think they do. So I'm not sure they have the ability to restrict accessory dwelling units. But that's not the county in permitting getting involved in that discussion. It's the Pebble Beach company as the homeowners association negotiating with the property owners that are part of that homeowners association.
Because I think HOAs, there is a stipulation in the state law that basically precludes HOAs from preventing ADUs.
Yeah, there's something, and I'm not the expert on this. This would be something a lawyer would have to answer, but something about a Davis-Sterling Act and common interest developments. And there is a situation where they can be restricted, but that I don't think that Pebble Beach company actually meets that test as the authority that has the ability to restrict them under the Davis-Sterling Act.
But at this point, it's your understanding that they're not going to be approving those. I mean, it's almost like the county can approve all the permits, but going through the separate processing of design approvals in Pebble Beach, they would not approve it. So
Right.
you're stuck in the middle.
The Pebble Beach company would like you to go to them through their architectural review process before you come to the county.
Yeah.
And we would encourage that, but we're not following their recommendations in our permitting.
Okay. Thanks for that information. Libby has another question. How is Monterey County and other counties monitoring their review period of 60 days? I submitted an ADU last year and the review process took 6 months. It included environmental health review because there was a new septic system. I guess maybe that was the holdup. What do you have a comment on that?
I think that in general, permitting is taking longer than it is supposed to take under Permit Streamlining Act and other provisions that we have in place for processing permits because of the quantity of permits that we have right now and and the lack of quantity of people to deal with them. So, you know, we're not always going to meet the required timelines, unfortunately. We do our best, but every case is going to be different. Every ADU is going to be different. So a simple ADU where you're on a public water system or a water system that gives permission for you to connect, that has already documented quality and capacity, and you're on a sewer system and it, you know, all of the boxes are checked, that's going to take a lot less time than a project that needs some kind of water testing, water analysis, scoping and locating septic systems and all of the stuff that goes along with that.
Eric, can I jump in with one comment?
Sure, go ahead, Alessia.
Something that I've seen from one of the jurisdictions recently, which might be helpful for the planners who are checking the ADU documentation. I received one of the plan checks back, and it was the Excel sheet 5 pages long. And at first I was horrified until I noticed one little column next to every comment. The column had a link to the code, to the building code or ordinance code or whatever it was referred to. First of all, that means it's a template that the planner goes through every time for every plan check. Second, it saves him from my questions when I personally ask, like, why are you saying I should need to do that? Because now I have a link to go to. And I think like it sounds like a lot of work the first time, but I think it might save a lot of time for the plan checkers when they, you know, kind of go into the grid of doing a lot of ADUs in the nearest future.
Okay, thank you. I think, Marnie, how are you with time? I know you had mentioned you might have to be leaving soon. I just wanted to check and see if they have specific questions for Carmel, that we have enough time to get some questions answered by the Carmel representative. Are you?
Yeah, so I do need to sign off at 1.
Okay.
Eric,
So-
one for the city of Carmel.
I'm sorry?
There is a question for the city of Carmel by June Solano in the Q&A.
Okay.
I think it's number 3, 4.
Well, I think this was answered, but I'll go ahead and ask it again. You know, in the city of Carmel doesn't include the you know, allowable FAR and lot coverage calculations into the you know, in dealing with ADUs, except for the limit of 850 square feet. Is that correct, Marnie?
Yeah, so that's part of the statewide exemption. I don't believe that it's something specific to Carmel, but the state law says that up to 800 square feet can be or must be permitted by right if it meets certain setbacks and height. And so we are following that in Carmel.
Mm-hmm. And then I guess it's in terms of the ministerial versus having the reviews done in a way that allows some design review. How do you look at that? I was just thinking about an example of an application I saw go before the planning commission where there was an ADU attached to a new house structure design, and the drawings basically where the ADU was, which was basically part of the whole elevation of the design, was X'd out, and it just had a BP, you know, building permit number this, and you know, approved under separate permit. But obviously, as a design element, it's completely part of that house design. But yet, when the planning commission reviewed it, they couldn't even see it. I guess that's basically would be allowed. But I mean, it does bring up kind of the issue of how can you control character, or how do you set up, this is a really good question, these objective zoning and design review standards that I think are allowed. It's interesting, I wanted to read from the ADU handbook. It talks about what objective means, and it says, Objective zoning and design review standards mean standards that involve no personal or subjective judgment by a public official and are uniformly verifiable by reference to an external and uniform benchmark or criterion available and knowable by both the development applicant or proponent and the public official prior to submittal. So I guess that's an opening for Carmel in terms of writing their ordinance to put something that's objective, but also can perhaps, work on keeping quote unquote character and to the village.
Yeah, I mean, the character is extremely important. And I imagine as we start to develop our objective standards, there will be quite a few in order to achieve that. We are seeing a lot of ADUs coupled with new construction. So that has been interesting. It's part of the house, it's attached to the house, and it's hard to disassociate it when you're going to planning commission, other than just to remind them that, that portion of the project is not subject to discretion. So those have been some interesting conversations that we've been having lately, because they have to show the ADU on the plans because it's, part of the house. But the planning commission can't really comment on it. So it's an interesting dynamic.
Okay, I wanted to open up the question and answer, especially to Marnie, since she has to leave it. One, is there any other questions regarding the city of Carmel? Let's see.
If you could ask them also to raise their hand if they'd like to ask it.
Yeah, if you'd like to ask or raise your hand. Let's see. I got to go to the attendees. I don't see any hands up, but you're certainly, if you have any questions of Marnie, please let me know now before she has to leave us.
There is one there that Marty could answer part of, and it's about having their own, the ADU having their own address.
I'm sorry, who's that? Who's speaking?
This is Tremaine speaking, and this is a question from June Solano.
Okay.
Question for all jurisdictions: do you need a separate address for ADU?
Did everyone hear that? Charmaine's voice was kind of, I think the question was, do you need a separate address for an ADU? I think the answer is no, but that's a good question. Does anyone want to answer that one?
I can answer for Santa Cruz County. That's really a conversation that we have with our fire districts, because it really comes down to a safety issue, and they need to be able to access these properties and find the unit when there's an emergency. So what we require as of now, we did a lot of back and forth with our fire districts on junior ADUs. But we certainly require separate addresses for ADUs, and we are now requiring separate addresses for junior ADUs if they're completely independent from the primary dwelling. If they're connected internally, then we don't require a separate address. But that has been a point of confusion from a health and safety perspective. And a lot of times there are some issues like that get confused when the applicant comes through the planning department, and then they go to the fire district and they find that they need additional, they need to do some additional work.
How about other jurisdictions? Craig, does Monterey County require separate addresses?
The same thing as Santa Cruz County. It's for emergency response mostly. That if a 911's called, and there are 2 units on site, which unit they go to is really the main purpose of it. And an address is relatively easy to get from Monterey County.
Okay, and Kim, with Monterey, same thing?
I actually don't know. I don't think it's been an issue for us. It's not in our ordinance. So I don't know if we've been requiring them or not at the building permit stage. it's a fairly administrative process if we do. They ask for the address, we send letters out to various groups and let them know we assigned an address, but I don't think we've been doing it. We can check.
Yep. Thank you. So any other questions of Marnie? I guess there's one question, Marnie, which we had, was one of my projects. We had an issue with restricting inaccessibility for an attached ADU. And I wasn't sure, I know we went through the approvals and that was what the city of Carmel determined in terms of the planning staff and voted on. But does the other people in the panel think that is allowable to prevent a door from the main house into an ADU? I don't know if anyone else has.
So, yeah, and maybe if I could just kind of clarify a little bit. So when we looked at the state's definition of an independent, living unit, our interpretation was that it would not be interaccessible. And we did reach out to HCD and have a conversation with them about that. And because the state law does not specifically define that one way or the other, they did defer to us as the local jurisdiction, and we're supportive of that. For us, it's mainly to really encourage and facilitate these ADUs as separate units and not just a mere extension of an existing house.
Okay. That answers that. Let's see, June had his hand raised. I'm gonna just see, I think you want to unmute June and ask your question?
I've asked him to unmute.
Not sure we can hear you, but hello? Go ahead, June, if you want to ask a question, especially on Marnie. Can't hear you. Okay, well, if you can, let me know if you can get that to work. I wanted to go back to a few other questions. Thank you, Marnie. I guess we'll see you at another time, and thanks for attending. There's a couple of questions in the Q&A from Marilyn Crenshaw, and this is probably for the whole panel. If a project gets to add a second main residence via the new California law SB 9, then does the main house and the new second residence each get an ADU and a JADU? I don't know if we want to take it jurisdiction by jurisdiction, but does anyone have a comment on that?
Well, I mean, we haven't crossed that bridge yet in Monterey County. We have, SB 9 is not the same legislation as the ADU ordinance is. So under SB 9, we have to ministerially approve a parcel map for a lot split or a duplex, essentially 2 units, if they meet all the criteria in SB 9, which urbanized areas, there are some in Monterey County, but most of the cities probably are urbanized areas. And then there's a whole list of things that would disqualify them under SB 9. So if you had a parcel map ministerially approved that created 2 lots from one under SB 9, each one of those lots could, subject to the ADU regulations, have a home and an ADU and a JADU under the ADU laws. If it were the provision of SB 9 where they're just adding a second unit and not doing the lot split, I think you can still have an ADU and JADU under the county's laws, but we have not officially crossed that bridge yet.
Okay. Daisy, do you have a view of what Santa Cruz looks at that, how they look at that?
Sure, yeah. So we've had a lot of interest in SB 9 locally. So we have developed a whole section of our website on SB 9 and done some coordination and development of, educational materials on that. So folks are welcome to check that out on our planning website. In terms of, my understanding is, as Craig mentioned, there's two main provisions of SB 9, one that allows 2 primary units on an eligible single family zoned parcel, and then another that allows subdivision of an eligible single family parcel into 2 parcels. So under the first provision, you can have 2 primary dwellings, and then each of those dwellings can have an ADU or JADU. You're not required to allow both of those primary dwellings to have an ADU and a JADU. The intention of the law is to allow for 4 dwellings on an existing parcel that's zoned for single family. And then similarly, if you have like an urban lot split is what they call these subdivision options, you can have 2 dwellings on each resulting parcel. So it could be 2 primary dwellings, it could be a primary dwelling and an ADU, a primary dwelling and a junior ADU. But in any case, the law's intention is that from an existing single family zoned parcel, you can get up to 4 dwellings of any kind. And local jurisdictions can go beyond that. That's the state law minimum. So like in Santa Cruz County, we already allow what we call dwelling groups, which are groups of single family dwellings on one parcel. And we allow ADUs and JADUs to be associated with those dwellings subject to our density regulations. So one kind of interesting thing for us is kind of figuring out how our local regs kind of interact with SB 9 in that way. But yeah, SB 9 is an interesting new piece of legislation for us all to get used to. I know HCD actually just released a little handbook on SB 9. I think it was last week. So that's brand new off the presses that we can all learn a little bit more about how they're interpreting the law.
Okay, great. I'm going to go back to the chat. They have a question. Maybe this is for everybody in general from Justin Pauly. Los Angeles has done a really neat job of pre-approving plans from many architects in the city. The result is a diversity of styles with different levels of quality and budget. Have any of the jurisdictions on this call considered setting up a system whereby plans by local architects could be pre-approved? Daisy, do you want to start with that since you're just talking?
Sure, yeah, I can start with that. Yeah, so we actually are in the process of setting that up in Santa Cruz County. We did get direction from our Board of Supervisors to set up a system whereby we pre-approve specific plans from specific designers that are submitted. And then also we're developing a set of, I think it's going to be 4 pre-approved ADU, kind of simple pre-approved ADU designs that are kind of off the shelf that people can use. So those are 2 kind of options that we're currently setting up and expect to be available later this year.
Okay. What about other jurisdictions? Craig, do you have is Monterey looking into that too?
Well, we have a contract for services with a consultant to prepare pre-approved, pre-plan checked ADU plans. And there will be a menu and there will be some ability to customize those plans with various treatments. At least that's the way we envision it happening as part of that. So I don't think that we have a pre-approved local architect kind of process for ADUs. Although we may be able to do some sort of pre-approval like we would for a subdivision. If I'm guessing that we would have to work that out with our building official and building department. It's not something that we've contemplated that I know of. Yeah.
Okay. Well, I'm sure as architects as part of our organization, we'd advocate for that. So that'd be something to look into, and maybe taking Los Angeles as an example to see how they're doing it. Kim, do you have I don't know if Monterey is doing anything with that.
We haven't yet. We've talked about it. I'm really interested about the idea of potentially working with local architects. If there's anything AIA can do to, I think we could go through a pre-approval process for a design, but obviously the architects would still have license to those documents. So I'm not sure how that would work with the public agency releasing those documents. So I'd be curious if there's opportunities there we could explore.
Okay. Let's see. I think we talked about Pebble Beach. Let's see, we have another question. Is there a maximum size of the ADU if it is attached to the main residence or breezeway connected to the main residence? That's Monterey County question, but I suppose anybody, probably a part of the state exemption. Go ahead, Craig.
Yeah, so the maximum ADU size is 1,200 square feet, whether it's attached or detached. At 800 square feet, the state law gives you some more permissions. And actually at 750 square feet, you then become not subject to traffic impact fees and some other impact fees. So it sort of depends on what you want, but 1,200 is the maximum. There really isn't a minimum. And 800 and 750 are the next most common sizes you would find. And then things under 750, just because you want a small efficiency unit that fits on your lot and functions as an ADU.
Great. I'm going to try to get through some of these questions that are in the Q&A. Here's one from Marilyn Crenshaw again. Are all new ADUs required to meet California Title 24 Energy Code of net zero power? If yes, what is the logic of limited 16-foot height if infill units surrounded by two neighbors are to install solar panels and receive sufficient sun? Who wants to take that on?
I can answer that. We get that question sometimes.
Okay.
Here in Santa Cruz County. So yes, detached new construction ADUs are required to meet the same Title 24 as single family dwellings in California. And so that often means that you need to include solar panels as part of your project. And then here in Santa Cruz County, we limit our ADU height to 16 feet for detached ADUs within our urban services line to avoid impacts to neighbors. Outside our urban services line, we allow ADUs to be the same height as primary dwellings. So inside our urban services line, we sometimes get questions from applicants on whether they can get some kind of exception based on the solar requirements. And the answer to that is yes, potentially. So we allow up to 5 feet extra building height with some special findings from our zoning administrator. And then we allow additional height with a variance. So if you were to have, a special situation on a property where you could make variance findings that there's, a situation on your property that's different from another property, perhaps because there's a 2-story building that's close by and casting a shadow and you're not able to meet your solar requirements, then we would probably grant that variance. But it is a process and we do currently still have that 16-foot height requirement.
Mm-hmm. Okay, Craig, does Monterey look at it the same way or?
We're slightly different. So the state law has the 16-foot limit, or not, it's not really a limit. The local jurisdictions can provide for additional height, but it does say, up to 16 feet tall in the state law. So that is what we go by. And then we have the ability under our existing zoning codes to attach it to the main home, which then gives it the ability to share the same height and setbacks as the main home, or go through a discretionary permit process to have additional height. Phil, I don't know if you want to add to that.
Yeah, you basically covered it in last piece of it is that our ADU regulations, if you want to go above the 16 feet, allow you to go through a use permit process to do that. So it is a discretionary planning application that would be reviewed by the zoning administrator, but the findings would be a little bit different and maybe not as stringent as a variance.
Okay. Thanks for that. I'm just gonna, June Solano had an additional question regarding the addresses, which I think Craig answered, but the follow-up question is, if the ADU is attached to the house, does it still need an address? Or if it's detached, it does, it sounds like. Go ahead.
I think that the answer is yes, and unless it shares internal circulation with the house site. I think that is, if you have a separate family living there and a separate, primary entrance exit location, that's usually when we would have you get a new address. It's usually an A or B kind of situation for emergency response purposes.
Let me see if I have any more questions. I just, if anyone wants to ask a question, just, by speaking, just press the raised hand signal and we will unmute you so you can go ahead and speak. Let's see if there's any other questions for. I think anybody else has any questions for our panelists? Let's see, I think we have a few more minutes if anyone wants one. I guess I'll follow up with my inner accessibility question. Craig or anybody on the panel, I know Carmel seems to be thinking that inner accessibility of an attached ADU is, since it's an independent dwelling unit, should not be allowed. Is that something that is looked at the same way in Monterey or Monterey County or Santa Cruz?
And no, Monterey County doesn't have a restriction for internal circulation and access. It usually is somewhat distinct space from the other main part of the residence, but could have a door between them. We don't preclude that in Monterey County.
Okay.
And then I would just add, I guess in Santa Cruz County, we're looking at it similar to Carmel. We only allow internal circulation between the ADU and the primary dwelling for junior ADU situations. And for the, for the standard ADU, we require, full fire separation. So, it's a separate dwelling unit.
Okay. But even if it's an hour separation?
Yeah, my understanding is we do not allow internal circulation between a standard ADU and primary dwelling.
Okay.
I think the one nuance for Monterey, because of our extreme restriction on water credits, and we're just trying to eke out any units that we can, for JADUs, you're not required to have separate bathroom facilities, and they can share it with the main house.
Yeah.
And so if we can at least get enough credits for one kitchen sink for the efficiency kitchen in the JADU, we're allowing them to share restroom facilities. So that is something, so it does allow interconnection.
And maybe just a general question for everyone here, if they don't know, the difference between a JADU and an ADU. Does anyone want to define that? It's basically a JADU has to be within an confines of an existing structure, house. Is that the definition, or?
It's different size limitations too. So I think a JADU is a maximum of 500 square feet. For ADUs, you need an efficiency kitchen and a bathroom. For a JADU, you just need the efficiency kitchen, although some JADUs also provide bathrooms. At least those are the key differences.
But if they were part of a house addition, that would be considered an ADU and not a JADU?
Oh, you're going back to can you create a new JADU? I don't know the answer to that.
Don't think so. It has to be out of existing space.
It has to be out of existing space. Okay, thanks, Alicia. That's why we have these experts here. It's great. Let's see, I'm trying to look at Dan Kern has another question, I think, regarding going back to some of the septic issues. How can Monterey County justify and ameliorate the massive amounts of nitrates added to the agricultural fields and ultimately down to the groundwater as compared to adding ADU efficiency kitchen and bath that needs expensive intermediation and monitoring? So that was a, you want to take that on?
Well, I'm not going to try and justify it. I know that, and in my role in planning, you know, we're coordinating with other jurisdictions and other agencies in the county and utility providers in our review and permitting of all development.
Mhm.
Environmental Health Bureau has adopted regulations, the local agency management plan, that establish the limits for wastewater disposal. And so they actually have to issue a septic permit when you're doing work on your septic system. And that septic permit review is subject to the local agency management plan. That local agency management plan, I believe, has some, it draws from some state level guidance, but that's really a question for our Environmental Health Bureau. You know, I'm not sure how ag fertilization in the fields relates to it, but we're a right to farm county, so we don't regulate ag operations in Monterey County, and we don't permit them, and we don't have septic systems that are subject to permits or buildings in those cases that are subject to permits. So we're not involved in that.
Mhm. Okay, Mark Norris has a question. Are fire and sound separation walls required between a junior ADU, a JDU, and the attached main house? Does anyone want to answer that one?
I can try. I think that if there's an internal connection between the junior ADU and the main house, and they're sharing, you know, restroom facilities, for instance, it really functions more similarly to like a guest wing of a house, and we wouldn't require fire separation in that case. But we do have other cases where the junior ADU is completely independent of the primary dwelling. For instance, like when
Detached garage is turned into a JDU.
well, it would have to be attached, but yeah, if an attached garage is converted to a junior ADU, in those cases, I believe we do require fire separation. But it's always best to check with the fire district to be sure.
Okay.
More likely yes than not.
Mhm.
And sound insulation, I don't think it vectors anywhere. I think that's personal preference.
Let's see, is there any other questions of our panelists? Since we have them here. Just again, if you want to raise your hand, there's a little, at the bottom of the screen, there's a raise your hand symbol. And then we can unmute you once we see that. I don't see any other hands, so we're getting close to the end of our hour and a half. And so maybe I'll leave it up to some of the panelists. Is there anything that you'd like to add to the discussion that maybe has not been talked about with ADUs, or thinks it's important for the architectural community to understand, or maybe who wants to take a stab at it?
I don't have anything to add, just I think that was actually a good discussion. A lot of the questions we get came up. I'm sure there'll be more questions as we continue. But I think it was a great conversation. So thank you for including us, and thank you for putting it together.
Yeah, and I appreciate everyone being here. Because I think, yeah, it's great to have the people that actually have are in a position to approve these things and make policy, are able to answer our questions. It's really, really helpful.
And we really want to help you guys to permit as many ADUs as possible. So as a parting gesture, I can offer one more hack that I've seen used. Because
Okay,
I know that you're always bound by legal counsel saying that, yes, you can do that, no, you cannot do that. So one of the ways to kind of go around the fact that everybody's expecting you to recommend vendors, architects, and construction companies, but you cannot. What you can do though is share the list of those who have built or have passed your review last year. And that's the easiest way to help your homeowners to find people who have done it before. Because the worst that can happen is the non-suspecting homeowner getting into contract with the guy who has never done an ADU before. And then their projects are always a disaster. And the good example is somebody who has only done, a construction company who has always done remodeling of kitchens and bathrooms, and suddenly they are into building new ADUs and never ends well. So it's always good to have somebody who has this experience, and that's a good way to check it.
Okay.
And thank you for the invitation. It was a
okay,
pleasure.
well,
to
thank
meet
you,
all.
thank you, Alessia. Really appreciate your participation too. Okay.
Yeah, and
Daisy,
I
go
just wanted to also say thank you. It's nice to be involved here and get a little bit connected to the Monterey County jurisdictions and what you all are doing. Sounds like most of the folks on the call are kind of more, located in Monterey County, maybe more interested in the Monterey County regulations. But if there are any questions about ADUs in Santa Cruz County, I just want to let you know that on our planning website, for Santa Cruz County, we do have a dedicated section for ADUs with a lot of resources, a lot of tools related to calculating costs, figuring out eligibility, those kinds of things. And we're also working on updating our ADU incentive program to include a technical assistance component for people at the beginning of their ADU development process, because we've seen that as a real stumbling block. So if other folks from other jurisdictions want to, keep check in with me on that as we kind of develop that program, it should be pretty interesting. And then the one other thing I wanted to note is that we're also developing a tiny homes ordinance in Santa Cruz County currently, which has been, closely related to, ADU questions and concerns, especially as people recover from the CZU fire that we had up here. So that's been an interesting process as well, and we expect that ordinance to come out later this year. But thank you so much for having me.
Great, thank you, Daisy. So with that, if I don't see any more questions, I want to just thank everyone for participating and coming on the webinar, and definitely to our panelists, Daisy Allen of Santa Cruz County, Craig Spencer and Phil Angelo of Monterey County, Marnie Waffle of Carmel, and Kim Cole of Monterey. Thank you all very much. And I think maybe we need to have another one on SB 8, 9, and 10 at some point, but we'll leave that for another time. Thank you, everyone.